make that true. I always love to start with a blessing for the learning. And so if you'd like to join with me, it ends with La'asok b'divrei Torah. Here we go. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, thank you. Roberta, if I can ask a favor, there's enough of me in the room, but it's just me. Can you put the final slide, the expanded one? That would be awesome, because I don't need to look at myself. That's a lot. That's really a lot. Thanks so much. Okay. When we did our first session, I shared this story. It's a fictionalized story told by Dara Horn, a wonderful author. Some of you might know her fiction and nonfiction writing. She's an important voice today. One of her more resonant books right now, to our great misfortune, is called People Love Dead Jews, which is a story that is not a fiction at all. But in one of her fiction stories, she tells of an encounter at a Ukrainian boarding school where a young person whose attention as a student is being sought after by two teachers. One of them is Chagall, and one of them is a poet called Dernister, the hidden one. And Dernister is trying to get the student's attention and brings him into Chagall's workshop and says, "Comrade Chagall," looking at the unfinished pieces around. There's blue and there's green and there's red and there's, tell our young friend, what does this one mean? And Chagall leans into the moment and says, "It means blue." I've told this story a number of times, but the reason why it's important to begin is because as we search for meaning, it is important to acknowledge that we are the ones searching for meaning, and we cannot know if what we see is what the artist intended for us to see, or in fact, us seeing was important to the artist at all. Sometimes, if you're an artist, a poet, a dancer, a singer, a writer, someone who feels fiercely, we just feel, and that stuff happens. But when I read just a little bit and learned from Candice in preparation for today, to think about Monet's quote, that especially the water lilies that surround what some call his cathedral. His quote that it creates an illusion of an endless whole, as you said, of a wave with no horizon and no shore. There's a Jewish word for that, God. I want to say the quote again. It's one of the ways that people have thought about the divine. An illusion of an endless whole of a wave with no horizon and no shore. Infinity, endless. The Kabbalists call that Ritzo and Shov, the ebb and flow of the divine, literally like waves. Buddhists have similar images. And so as we think about that, you can look in any direction. I'm looking at the one on the bigger screen. You're surrounded by all of that. What do you see? Now, it's not only what does Monet feel. In fact, it's powerful that he saw less well when he was doing this. In fact, the Torah says that of some of our patriarchs, their eyes dimmed in the final chapters of their lives. How human. And still to reach for the divine. I know I'm going to be going in that direction, regardless of what Monet's intentions might have been when it came to the idea of God. But given the horrors of World War I and the reality that violence continued past the final war, the last war. It's a very famous quote in, well, for those who know the song, a song written after the Yom Kippur War. Ani mavtiach lach yalda shali ktana. I promise you, my daughter, shezot tihiyeh hamilchama ha'achrona, that this will be the last war. That's the promise we want to make our children, and that's the promise they deserve. And when we don't have that promise fulfilled, when we don't have the capacity to end all wars, please God, we should still aim to do. We do reach, and for some of us, for me at least, I use the name God to talk about that reach. You don't have to believe in a specific being called God for this conversation to be resonant, I hope. But for me, I'm going to use that kind of language. And I hope that what you hear when I say God is an endless whole of a wave with no horizon and no shore. For me, that idea of God is not a being watching and doing. It is what connects me to you. It is what gives me hope beyond what I know. It gives me faith in something that isn't yet true. And it leads me to devote my life, as we all do, to the future, not only of Am Yisrael, but especially of Am Yisrael, and to the world around us. We've managed to keep caring despite it all. That sounds like a wave with no end, a beautiful, holy wave. So what have visions of the infinite done to the religious sensibility in Jewish tradition? We're not going to do all the texts in front of you, but some of my favorites are in this packet. And I hope you'll enjoy them. I'm going to. And I hope that they might even provoke some conversation. I'm going to go through it very quickly, but I'm, first of all, available. This is what I do, and it's fun for me. If you'd like to talk about these texts afterwards, and we don't have time now, please find me. It would be delightful. And it might be helpful. It might be provocative. It might be a little shocking. If I do my job right, it's all of those things. In Numbers, there's a moment where Aaron and Miriam, Moses' siblings, are jealous of him. They're jealous for a million reasons, but here's some of what they say. This is page 1. They say, has God spoken only through Moses? What's so special about you, little brother? I've had that conversation. Has God not spoken through us as well? And God heard it. I'm skipping a few verses. You can see it looks contiguous in yours, but if you looked at the chapter, there are a few verses I skipped. And God heard and said, hear these my words. When prophets of God arise among you, I make myself known to them in a vision. I speak with them in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is trusted throughout my household. With him, I speak mouth to mouth, plainly and not in riddles, and he beholds the likeness of God. How then did you not shrink from speaking against my servant Moses? Let's imagine that this text purports to tell us what actually happened. Let's deal with the origins of the Torah some other time. Let's live in the rules of its story. God says, Moses sees me. Does that make sense to you? You might have been taught, as I was taught in childhood, no one can see God. But what's going to be interesting over the next 2 minutes or so is there are going to be a lot of times in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible, where somebody sees something. And I opened with this section because God says Moses sees me. You might know the other texts where God says to Moses, you can't see me. God seems to be full of contradictions, and we seem to be created in God's image. That's an endless flow if there ever were one. The very next one is a classic one, and it's classic if you've ever prayed in Mass or if you've ever said the Kedusha. If you don't know what I'm saying, all I'll say is 3 words. Holy, holy, holy. Look at the verses at the bottom of this page. This is Isaiah. In the year that King Uzziah died, which tells you that he wants to locate himself in real history, good luck with the story that's to come, I beheld my sovereign seated on a high and lofty throne. In Hebrew, kisei ram v'nisa. If you ever sung during prayer, during the Kedusha, you've heard those words. And the skirts of God's robe filled the temple. So not only does God have a body sitting somewhere, God wears clothing. I don't know what to do with any of this. I'm not going to tie this up in a bow. Those of you who've learned with me know that I don't. But the text presents something, and we would do well to let it speak to us and to see what we see and then think about it. Let me say that again, because in fact, that's part of what I want to be pointing to here. Often when we see, we don't see what's in front of us. We often see what we think we're going to see. One of the phrases for that is unconscious bias, that deals with how we see human beings and realities. It also tells me that if I think I'm going to go see water lilies, I have no idea that it's meant to be a memorial to millions of dead human beings. When someone tells me that, am I willing to let in the reality that that's what's been there all along? It might not be all that's been there, but it's there. And if you look at a lot of Monet, especially the first one that you showed us, it's a lot of reflection. Because the lilies might not have a horizon, but if you look closely, at least at these, you see some of the things that are above the water reflected in the water. It's as if the water serves as a mirror. We're standing in front of a mirror. Do we see ourselves reflected back at all? Our world reflected back at all? Where's the horizon? There's no shore. I'm going to continue in the Isaiah text. Seraphs, seraphim, the fire angels, stood in attendance, each with 6 wings, 2 covering the face, 2 covering the body, and 2 to fly with. And one would call to the other, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Holy, 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 God of hosts, whose presence filled all the earth. I use this example just to get to the next one because these images of the infinite try to take what is completely irrepressible, uncontainable, beyond, and describe it. You would not believe it's in there. I mean, you might have studied this stuff before, but for those of us who are seeing the text anew, and I guess even for those of us who might be familiar, it should be shocking to see depictions of God. If you thought those were weird, get ready for these. This is page 2, Ezekiel, just the first verse of the first chapter. In the 30th year, on the 5th day of the 4th month, again, locating the impossible within time. When I was in the community of exiles, near Chbar Chanal, the heavens opened and I saw visions of God. The reason I didn't put any of the visions is because according to mysticism, if you study this chapter and you understand it, your head will explode. And I didn't want to put anyone at risk. But if you look at the first chapter of the book of Ezekiel, I'll just be colloquial, it'll blow your mind. And those are later in the Torah. Come back with me to Exodus at the very bottom of this page. Moses, who saw God face to face uniquely, somehow wasn't so unique. Look at this. Then Moses and Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, and 70 elders of Israel ascended Mount Sinai, and they saw the God of Israel. If you think that that's a mistranslation, let me assure you, it's not. Vayir'u et Elohei Yisrael. They saw the God of Israel. That's strange. And then, under whose feet was the likeness of pavement for sapphire, like the very sky for purity. Now, no one knows what this means. But the Torah says God has feet, and the ground under God's feet is in the sky, and the ground is pure like blue sapphire. You can say it's all metaphor. Maimonides said that. You can say, I'm uncomfortable with these ideas. Everything is meant to be a parable for understanding the brilliance, the unfathomable brilliance of the divine. Sapphire, brilliance, blue, I see. Ancient people often looked at the world and said, oh, the sun crossing across the sky is Apollo's chariot. Ideological myths trying to explain how the world functions and what it is, ascribing it to God or the gods. That's not uncommon. But it is important for us to remove any filter from our eyes in order to actually see what's in front of us. So again, just looking at a piece of art. And what I'm actually doing, because of the consciousness I'm trying to raise in the room and within myself, is I'm watching myself watch. And I don't know what I see. And I don't know who I think I am trying to figure it out. How can any of us hold that much loss? And I thought it was just a wall calendar I bought in college. I didn't know. Now, in front of us, I told you there are way too many texts, but I don't want to miss any of the juicy stuff in front of us. So if it gets to be too much of the written word, I invite you to let your eyes float back to the art and to see it and to see yourself seeing it. Imagine just for a moment, like Paul Simon has a good song about this. Felt my soul, right, suddenly rise, looking down at me. So I didn't know, Candice said you were going to put an image of Kibbutz Re'im, where the Nova Festival happened. I didn't know that that was going to be there, but of course it's there. It's that lily or that one. or this one. So I invite us just to be in this, to be surrounded by it, not in dark ways. So powerful to have light in the image and in us and in the room and in our work as we contemplate meaning itself. All right, so I'm going to do this one. Go to page 3 with me. I'm not going to do most of it. I'm just going to show you one line. This is from the Talmud. If you're locating it in time, it's around the year 600 CE. This is the book of Yevamot. That really doesn't matter because if you've ever studied Talmud, you know that the title of the book has nothing to do with its contents. It's like rabbis. We say we're going to talk about something and then do something completely else. Right? It's the problem with us. One of the problems with us. In this text, which we're not going to look at in depth, there are contradictions in verses, meaning you can't see God, you can't see God. You have all the time in the world, you have no time. Limited, unlimited. How do you reconcile these things? Especially when your lived experience calls into question something you were promised. I want to say that last part of it. That's the point. What do you do when your lived experience contradicts a promise of your faith? Calls into question a truth you've believed in. This can't be. I was told this couldn't be. We have words for that. We call it blasphemous. So if you look, I'm going to point on my page to where I am. Talmud, I'm at the bottom right of that section where it says, I saw the Lord, which is a quote from that chapter of Isaiah that we read. He walks into the room, God's hem fills the room in Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. So what does it mean, I saw the Lord? It is to be understood as it was taught in a Braita, which means an older than Talmud text. All the prophets observed through an obscure looking glass. The word for that is aspaklaria. What a great word.
Is that Greek?
It's a Greek word, thank you. It is a Greek word in Hebrew, or it's a Greek word written in Hebrew letters, because the rabbis knew Greek. Doesn't that say something about the world that we've always inhabited? We share language and we try to frame it in our vernacular. You know, the complicated notion of Hamas that the government and much of the populace of Israel had pre-October 7th was called the concepcia, the conception. And they need a reconcepcia now. We do. So when language sneaks its way in, but then takes on religious significance, that's sort of what we're going to see right now. So all the prophets observed through an obscure looking glass in an aspaklaria she'ina nehira, a looking glass that wasn't clear. Moses, however, observed through a clear looking glass. Remember what we read in Numbers? To all the other prophets, God says to Aaron and Miriam, I speak in dreams. And you know what dreams are like. Sometimes you remember them. Sometimes you just remember that you dreamt. Sometimes you wonder if you dreamt. That's the end of Peter Pan, right in between asleep and awake. That's where you'll find me, says Tinkerbell. So somehow in this in-between, the liminal space, that's where most who can experience God. But Moses supposedly, I don't know, Moses supposes, I don't know, almost happened to say. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, that was good, unintentional. Moses saw something clearly, but we have no idea what that could mean. Even with all of the biblical texts that I've already shown you, where there is a vision of God, we don't know what it is to see God through an aspaklaria nehira, through glasses that work, through a clear looking glass. Think about the phrase, Lewis Carroll, through the looking glass. It's anything but straightforward. So what does Rashi, a famous Torah commentator from 1040, say about this line, bottom of the page? What does it mean? They observed through an obscure looking glass. They had the intention to see, but did not. Moses looked through the clear aspaklaria and knew he wasn't looking directly into God's face. Let that in for a second. It's so cool. They had the intention to see, but they didn't really see. He knew, but what did he know? That he didn't see. I don't know what to do with that, but isn't it cool? There's something extraordinary about praising Moshe for seeing clearly and loving him in this textual way, for acknowledging that he didn't really see. Look again at the art while I turn the page. What could Monet see? First of all, he saw the world enough to respond to it. He saw his wife, and he saw his son, and he saw millions of others. And this came out. And abstraction as a way of trying to describe the indescribable, to paint figuratively, to work with materials and sensibilities and reality and surround viewers with the infinite. I can't believe I'm actually seeing the painting now. I'm not supposed to be able to see that. But I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing a reflection of everything that means to purport. That shows me a reflection of the sky, a reflection of the tree. So follow me down the rabbit hole using the looking glass for a second. I'm on page 4. This is a completely different section of the Talmud, which also has nothing to do with the title of its book. Its title is Brachot, which means blessings. This is about dreams. Again, have at it. Shmuel, when he would see a bad dream, would say, the dreams speak falsely. It's a quote from Zechariah, which means you have a bad dream, you're like, no, that's not, it's just a dream. When he would see a good dream, he would say, and your dreams speak falsely, isn't it written, I speak to them in a dream? Which is a quote from Numbers that we just saw. No, it was a good dream, it's real. I mean, we know this. When you have a dream, it's a bad one, you try to push it away. The corner of your mind until you can forget it, which actually makes it much harder to forget, because I'm actively touching it while I push. But a good dream I want to hold on to. And those are the ones that are really hard to remember sometimes. So Rava raised a contradiction. This is like rabbinic acrobats, right? Rava raised a contradiction between these verses. The Zechariah verse right above and the Numbers verse right above. Dreams are false, dreams are true, okay? On the one hand, it's written, I speak with him in a dream. On the other, it's written, and the dreams speak falsely. The Gemara, I mean the Talmud that we're in right now, resolves the contradiction. It's not a difficulty. By the way, that's rabbinic acrobatics. You want to see this? Like, listen to the next time a rabbi around you speaks. There's this and there's this. There's a problem, but really, no problem. Right? That's how we have fun with things. We take completely contradictory things and we try to live. And it sounds a little bit funny when we do that, because it's funny. It's not a difficulty. Here, the verse which means I speak to him in a dream, that's when an angel speaks to you. Here, the dreams are false, talks about dreams from a demon. Doesn't that make it better? Yeah. Totally, right? No, it just means I had a bad dream, so I'm gonna say it came from the other place. So what do they do with that? Look at the right. This is actually rabbinic humor, and I actually think very helpful for us. I hope it's helpful for us. First of all, in a long chain of those transmitting this statement, it's good to quote people, but look how many people are quoting how many people. We should not speak like this. It's good to attribute, but let's not. It is said that Rabbi Bizna Bar Zavda said, that Rabbi Akiva said, that Rabbi Panda said, that Rabbi Menachem said, that Rabbi Biryaim said, in the name of one elder, some guy. And who is he? Rabbi Bina. Okay, so what did they say? There were 24 interpreters of dreams in Jerusalem. One time, I dreamed a dream and went to each of them to interpret it. What one interpreted for me, the other did not interpret for me. And nevertheless, all of the interpretations were realized in me to fulfill that which is stated. All dreams follow the mouth of the interpreter. Shopping for meaning. 24 different possibilities from my one dream. They're all true, but they're all true for me. And in fact, the interpreters maybe made it true for me because they told me what it meant and it resonated for me. What do dreams mean? Look at the art. I don't know what to do. I can say what I think it means, but maybe in a minute, I won't think that that was right. Maybe none of it's right. Maybe all of it's right. Maybe the totality of the true, as Emmanuel Levinas, the French Jewish philosopher, said, is the only way to appreciate meaning. The collective I is the only way to know what's real. So just very quickly, I'm gonna get us to the end of this. I say quickly, I'm a rabbi, so again, forgive me. There's a Mishnah that talks about the difference between a mirror and something that functions like a mirror. It just says here, aspaklaria, meaning mirror. It's another rabbinic way of using the word. A mirror is pure, which means it can't contract impurity. It's a concern in the ancient world. We could use germs and speak similarly about that today. A tray that was made into a mirror remains susceptible, but if it was originally made to serve as a mirror, it is pure. Don't worry about that. I'm just pointing out that there's a difference between mirrors and things that are not mirrors. And because this is New York women, even though some of us are lucky enough to be included, I didn't want to skip this next thing, but I'm just going to tell it to you without making you look down. On the next page is this beautiful teaching in the Torah that among the pieces of furniture in the desert tabernacle, before there was a holy temple, there was the traveling tabernacle. And there was furniture that they brought and installed as part of the service. And one of the pieces was called the kior. Modern Hebrew kior is a sink in what sounds Christian, but is actually just Old English, is a laver, where you would wash your hands before serving God. It's made of copper. And tradition says that this copper laver was made from the mirrors of the women. You might know this Midrash. It's a beautiful and sweet story. Copper in the ancient world, you can find this in many, many museums, was used as a reflective material. It was an early form of a mirror. When did women use the mirrors? This is not the Torah. This is rabbinic Midrash. This is imaginative and later. When Pharaoh gave the men back-breaking labors during enslavement, they never would come home. They would fall asleep in the field until they would begin work again. And because of that, no babies were going to be born. So the women, again, remember, this is an ancient Midrash. Let it be sweet for all of its modern complexity. The women used the mirrors to make themselves look beautiful. And they would then bring the mirrors with them and look at the mirror, like taking a selfie in the ancient world, looking at the mirror with their husbands and say, "You're more beautiful." No, you're more beautiful. You're more beautiful. Moses was upset that this device would be included in the holy service of the temple. And God says, it's the most holy thing we could possibly have. The belief, even when things are terribly difficult, that there must and will be a future. And I say to the rescued hostages, I say to you, I try to remember to myself, I tell my children, we are beautiful. More beautiful. I'm going to make it a point for the next while to recount this one piece of news from this last weekend that blew my heart wide open, melted it a little bit. You might have seen the story already, and I hope that you'll share it for its meaning, especially on the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz today. What Jewish self-determination means, not being liberated by the other. Let me make that point a little bit more clear. International Holocaust Memorial Day, which is today, is the way the world chooses to remember Jews they saved. Yom HaShoah, the Hagvura, the day of Holocaust and heroism on our calendar, is when we fought back. All of that is summed up in one very visual representation for me. The braids that the released young women have had in their hair, I had thought was a prop by Hamas to make it look like they were being taken care of. It turns out Agam, one of the young hostages, who, please God, is scheduled to be freed on Thursday, was braiding the women's hair before they were set free for two reasons. One is it feels nice to be taken care of. Number two, It was code to her family because it's the hairstyle that she always did to let them know that she was alive. Braiding dignity into reality through a visual taps into the most deep notion of self-determination, that beauty is our definition, not enslavement in the ancient world, and not as victims. For all of the truth of this, the visual with what you learn it means can help. Last thing, very back of the package. This is from one of my favorites. You might know Paulo Coelho. The Alchemist is, I think required reading for a human soul and for my children's elementary school. This is another book called The Warrior of Life. A young man went to a rabbi to consult him about what to do in life. The latter led him over to a window and said, "What do you see through the glass?" "I see people coming and going and a blind man begging in the street." Then the rabbi showed him a great mirror and again asked the man, "Look into this mirror and now tell me what you see." "I see myself." "And now you no longer see others. See how the window and the mirror are both made of the same material, glass? But because there is a thin layer of silver on the glass, you see nothing but your own figure. You must compare yourself to these two types of glass. With a window, you saw others and had compassion for them. Covered with a thin layer of silver, all you see is yourself. You shall only be worth something when you have the courage to tear off the silver coating over your eyes so that you can see and love others once again. Aspaklaria sheina nehira, a glass that is not clear. Aspaklaria nehira, a glass that is clear. Moses' ability to see clearly, but to know that he didn't see anything, but he knew that he was seeing. The ability of an artist to bring us into the infinite. How we see matters. And in the language of this slightly fictionalized rabbi, we have to be able to remove the filters from our eyes so that we can love once again. It is good to see clearly beauty. It is urgently important to see when things are not, so that we can be the helpers we are called to be. It is a beautiful conversation we're having right now. This art is born in a moment of history, and we are living in one too. What we do with our eyes and how we remind ourselves to see and to see clearly and to love matters. I'll quote one last rabbi. She's just down the street. And if you're lucky enough to daven with Rabbi Buchtal, you know why I'm quoting her. If you haven't spent time with her, try to find her, learn from her. Her model of heroism on every level, dignity on every level, and erudition on every level makes her one of the rabbis of this generation. She can channel all of this very eloquently. And here is one way that she did. While the rabbis of the Midrash suggested that Moses was superior to all the other prophets because he only needed one aspaklaria, a clear one, to understand God's truth, perhaps we should all hope to be more like the rest of the prophets who must look through a number of prisms in order to gain understanding. I would bless us, first of all, with gratitude for the opportunity to come together and to learn and to appreciate good art and to be with good people and to do really good work in the world. But I would also bless us to imagine for a second that we are surrounded, not as an illusion, with an endless home of a wave with no horizon and no shore. For me, I use the word God in that way. But when I am in this room, or earlier today in that room, and in between in that room, and any place that you find yourself building this world again, which I hope is everywhere you find yourself, I hope that you'll also feel surrounded by the beauty of this, by the reflection that includes light of all of this even and especially in the aftermath of great pain. May we be blessed to connect to the light. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.